I woke up that Tuesday morning in my Phoenix, Arizona subdivision, expecting to deal with the usual annoyances of living in a planned community. But I never imagined the HOA president would literally endanger lives just to prove a point. The moment I saw that bright orange cap sitting on top of my private fire hydrant, I knew things were about to get interesting. My name is Gregory Iverson, and I moved into Sunset Ridge Estates about 3 years ago after my divorce was finalized. The house came with 5 acres of property, which was one of the main selling points for me. The previous owner had installed a private fire hydrant connected to a well system because this part of Phoenix was still transitioning from rural to suburban, and the municipal water lines hadn't reached our section yet. The hydrant was completely legal, inspected annually by the fire department, and had been a key factor in getting my homeowner's insurance at a reasonable rate. My insurance company had knocked 15% off my premium because of that hydrant, and the fire department had it on their maps as an auxiliary water source. I was pouring my morning coffee when I glanced out the kitchen window and saw something off about the front yard. The hydrant, which normally stood like a red sentinel near the stone wall by the driveway, had something on top of it. I set down my mug and walked outside in my slippers, still wearing my pajama pants and an old Arizona State t-shirt. Someone had placed a bright orange utility cap over the hydrant outlet. Not just placed it, but secured it with industrial adhesive and what looked like tamper-proof bolts. I knelt down to inspect it closer and saw a laminated notice zip tied to the hydrant. The notice was on official Sunset Ridge Estates HOA letterhead, and it made my blood pressure spike instantly. Unapproved exterior structure. Fire hydrant does not comply with community aesthetic standards. Per Section 12.4 of the CC and Articles, all exterior structures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. This structure has been deemed non-compliant and is hereby sealed pending removal. Failure to remove within 30 days will result in fines of $200 per day. Signed, Patricia Mooreland, HOA President. I read it 3 times, each time getting angrier. Patricia Mooreland was the quintessential HOA tyrant. Mid-50s, always wore pearl necklaces even to pool meetings, drove a white Lexus SUV with a live, laugh, love sticker on it, and treated the homeowners association like her personal fiefdom. She had a particular talent for making everyone's life miserable over the smallest infractions. Last month, she had tried to fine my neighbor for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox post, but this was different. This was not just petty tyranny. This was dangerous. I immediately called the fire department's non-emergency line. The dispatcher connected me to the fire marshal's office, and I explained the situation to a woman named Sandra who sounded both concerned and annoyed. "Mr. Iverson, that hydrant is registered with us as an auxiliary water source. Nobody has the authority to cap it or disable it. That's actually a violation of state fire code. Give me your address again and I'll have someone out there today." "How soon can they get here? Let me check." "Actually, Chief Drummond is doing inspections in your area this afternoon. I'll add your address to his route. Expect him around 2. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately took about 20 photos of the capped hydrant from every angle. I had learned early in my dealings with the HOA that documentation was essential. Patricia had a habit of denying things she had done if there wasn't proof. While I waited for the fire chief, I dug out my HOA documents from the filing cabinet in my home office. I had reviewed them before buying the house, and I was certain there was nothing in the CC and Articles about fire hydrants. I spent an hour going through every page and I was right. Section 12.4 dealt with sheds, pergolas, and decorative structures. It said nothing about safety equipment. The hydrant had been there for 8 years, installed by the previous owner with all proper permits from the county. It had been visible in the listing photos when I bought the house. The HOA had never said a word about it until now. I suspected I knew why Patricia had suddenly developed an interest in my hydrant. 2 weeks ago, at the monthly HOA meeting, I had voted against her proposal to increase annual dues by 30%. The increase was supposed to fund a new playground and a renovation of the community clubhouse, but I had reviewed the budget and pointed out that we already had enough in reserves to do both projects without raising dues. Several other homeowners had agreed with me, and the proposal had failed. Patricia had given me a look that could have melted steel. This was retaliation, pure and simple. At exactly 2 o'clock, a white Ford F-250 with Phoenix Fire Department markings pulled into my driveway. A man in his late 40s climbed out, wearing a navy blue uniform shirt with Chief Drummond embroidered on it. He had short gray hair, a weathered face that suggested decades of sun exposure, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too many preventable disasters. "Mr. Iverson." "Tom Drummond." He shook my hand with a firm grip. "Sandra told me about your situation. Let's take a look." I walked him over to the hydrant. He spent a few moments examining the cap, the notice, and the hydrant itself. His expression grew darker with each passing second. "This is a serious problem," he said finally. "This hydrant is on our auxiliary supply map. In a wildfire situation, which is a very real concern in this area, we might need this water source. By sealing it, your HOA has effectively disabled emergency fire response infrastructure." Can they legally do that? Absolutely not. Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 11-823, subsection D, makes it a Class 1 misdemeanor to tamper with or disable fire protection equipment. That includes private hydrants that have been registered with the fire department. He pulled out his phone and took several pictures. "I'm going to need to speak with your HOA board." "Who's the president?" "Patricia Mooreland. She lives at 4782 Desert Willow Court, about 4 streets over." "I'll pay her a visit. In the meantime, I'm issuing a citation for this." He pulled out a tablet from his truck and began typing. "The HOA will need to remove this cap immediately and restore the hydrant to full functionality. If they don't comply within 24 hours, the fines start at $500 per day. Per day. Per day. Fire code violations are not something we take lightly, especially not in Arizona during fire season." He handed me a printed copy of the citation. "I'm also going to do a full inspection of the common areas in this subdivision. If your HOA president thinks she can interfere with fire safety equipment, I want to see what other violations might be present." Chief Drummond left to find Patricia, and I went back inside to wait. I felt a mixture of vindication and anxiety. I had been right to call the fire department, but I knew this was going to escalate the conflict with Patricia to a new level. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Gregory Iverson." The voice was clipped, tight with barely contained rage. It was Patricia speaking. "I just had the fire chief at my door threatening me with citations and fines. He said you called him about the hydrant." "I did. You capped my private fire hydrant, Patricia. That's illegal. That eyesore is a violation of our community standards. It's ugly, it's industrial looking, and it has no place in a residential neighborhood. It's a safety device. It's been there for 8 years. And according to the fire chief, what you did is a Class 1 misdemeanor." There was a long pause. When Patricia spoke again, her voice had dropped to a dangerous calm. You're making a very big mistake, Gregory. The HOA board has a lot of authority in this community. If you want to live here peacefully, I suggest you cooperate. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you of reality. The next board meeting is Thursday night, 7 o'clock. I expect to see you there. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, anger churning in my gut. Patricia was trying to intimidate me, which meant she knew she was in the wrong but was too proud to back down. This was going to get worse before it got better. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that only Phoenix in July can deliver. The sun was just starting to set as I walked to the community clubhouse, located at the entrance to the subdivision. The building was a single-story stucco structure with a clay tile roof, surrounded by xeriscaped gardens full of cacti and decorative rocks. Inside, the main room had been set up with folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was at the center of the table, flanked by her 4 board members. To her right was Kenneth Marsh, the vice president, a retired accountant who always looked like he had just smelled something unpleasant. To her left was Deanne Fletcher, the secretary, a timid woman in her 60s who never contradicted Patricia on anything. The treasurer was Marcus Webb, a middle-aged real estate agent who seemed more interested in his phone than the meetings. Rounding out the board was Lynette Carson, the member-at-large, who had a reputation for agreeing with whatever Patricia said. About 30 other homeowners were scattered among the chairs. I recognized most of them. There were Bill and Susan Patterson, the retired couple from down the street. James Rodriguez, who worked from home as a software developer. Margaret Chen, a nurse at Phoenix General. All of them looked tired, like they would rather be anywhere else. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. She went through the standard preliminaries, reading the minutes from last month, reviewing the treasurer's report, discussing ongoing maintenance issues. Then she got to what she clearly considered the main event. Item 7 on the agenda concerns a violation at 4291 Saguaro Drive, the property owned by Mr. Gregory Iverson. Patricia looked directly at me, her expression cold. Mr. Iverson has an unpermitted structure on his property that violates our architectural standards. Despite receiving official notice, he has refused to remove it and has instead filed a frivolous complaint with the fire department. Several heads turned to look at me. I raised my hand. "You need to be recognized by the chair before speaking," Patricia said. "Then recognize me." She pressed her lips together but nodded. "Mr. Iverson has the floor." I stood up. The structure Patricia is referring to is a private fire hydrant that was installed 8 years ago with all proper county permits. It's registered with the Phoenix Fire Department as an auxiliary water source. It was there when I bought the house, and it's been there longer than Patricia has been HOA president. There is nothing in our CC and Articus that classifies safety equipment as a structure requiring architectural approval. Section 12.4 clearly states, Patricia began. Section 12.4 addresses sheds, pergolas, gazebos, and decorative structures. I interrupted. A fire hydrant is emergency safety equipment. It's not decorative. And more importantly, Patricia, what you did was illegal. You kept emergency fire equipment, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor under Arizona law. Chief Drummond issued you a citation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several people looked shocked. Bill Patterson leaned over to his wife and whispered something. Patricia's face flushed red. The citation is being disputed. Our HOA attorney has advised us that we have the authority to regulate all exterior structures, regardless of function. Then your attorney is wrong, I said. And if the HOA doesn't remove that cap within 24 hours, You'll be fined $500 per day. Those fines come out of the HOA budget, which means every homeowner here will end up paying for Patricia's vendetta against me." "Vendetta?" Patricia's voice rose. "How dare you? You capped my hydrant 2 weeks after I voted against your dues increase," I said. "That's not a coincidence. That's retaliation." Kenneth Marsh cleared his throat. "Mr. Iverson, I think you're being unreasonable. The board has a responsibility to maintain community standards." "The board has a responsibility to follow the law," I shot back. "Fire safety trumps your aesthetic preferences." Margaret Chen raised her hand. Patricia, looking flustered, nodded at her. "I have a question for the board," Margaret said. She was a small woman with glasses and graying hair, but her voice was steady. "Is it true that capping the hydrant was illegal? Did the fire chief really issue a citation?" Patricia exchanged glances with Kenneth. "The fire chief issued a notice of violation, which we are contesting through proper legal channels." "That's not an answer," James Rodriguez called out from the back. "Did we break the law or not?" "The situation is more complicated than Mr. Iverson is making it sound," Patricia said. "The fire department is overreaching its authority." "I'd like to hear from the fire department directly," Bill Patterson said. Several other people nodded and voiced agreement. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she clearly realized she was losing control of the room. "Fine. We can invite the fire marshal to a future meeting to discuss the matter." "Why not now?" I asked. "Chief Drummond told me he was going to inspect the common areas. Maybe we should ask him what he found." Patricia's eyes widened slightly, just for a second, but it was enough. She was worried about something. "The chief's inspection has no bearing on this meeting," she said quickly. "Actually, I think it does." The voice came from the doorway. Chief Drummond walked into the clubhouse still in uniform. He was carrying a thick folder and a tablet. "Good evening, everyone. Mrs. Mooreland, I'm glad you're all gathered here. It saves me from having to send individual notices." Patricia stood up so fast her chair scraped backward. "Chief Drummond, this is a private HOA meeting. You can't just barge in. This is a semi-public meeting concerning community safety, and I have legal authority under Arizona Fire Code to address safety violations directly with the responsible parties." He walked to the front of the room and set his folder on the table. "After Mr. Iverson contacted me about the capped hydrant, I decided to conduct a comprehensive inspection of Sunset Ridge Estates. What I found is deeply concerning." He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "I'm issuing citations for 37 separate fire code violations throughout this subdivision." The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. "That's impossible," she stammered. "We maintain this property." "No, you don't." Chief Drummond's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Everyone fell silent. "Let me walk you through some of the highlights. The fire extinguishers in this clubhouse are 10 years out of date. The exit signs are not functional. You have storage blocking 2 emergency exits. The kitchen has no fire suppression system, despite having commercial-grade equipment. Outside, your vegetation management is completely inadequate. You have dried brush within 15 feet of multiple structures, which violates defensible space requirements for wildfire-prone areas." He pulled out more papers. "You have 6 common area structures with damaged or missing smoke detectors. Your pool equipment shed has exposed electrical wiring and no GFCI outlets, despite being a wet location. The fence around the retention pond has multiple gaps, creating a drowning hazard. Your parking lot has fire lane markings that have faded to the point of being invisible, and I observed 3 vehicles parked in those fire lanes with no enforcement." With each item, Chief Drummond's voice grew harder. The playground equipment is positioned too close to the wooden ramada, creating a fire hazard. The ramada itself has been built with non-fire-rated materials, despite being a public gathering space. Your landscaping includes highly flammable ornamental grasses within 5 feet of the clubhouse. And perhaps most egregiously, your main water shut-off valve for the common area irrigation system is locked inside a maintenance closet with no key box or emergency access. Patricia had gone pale. Several board members were staring at the table. The other homeowners looked shocked. The total fines for these violations, if not corrected within the specified timeframes, will exceed $200,000, Chief Drummond said. And that's not including the penalties for the hydrant tampering, which is a criminal matter I've referred to the Phoenix Police Department. Criminal? Kenneth Marsh looked up sharply. You can't be serious. Tampering with fire safety equipment is a Class 1 misdemeanor. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office will decide whether to press charges, but I've made my recommendation clear. Chief Drummond looked at each board member in turn. You endangered lives because of an aesthetic preference. That's not something I take lightly. He handed a thick packet to Patricia. These are your violation notices. Each one specifies what needs to be corrected and the deadline. Some of them are immediate, meaning you have 72 hours. Others give you 30 days. I'll be back to re-inspect, and if any of these violations are not corrected, the daily fines begin. Patricia took the packet with shaking hands. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. One more thing, Chief Drummond said. Mr. Iverson's hydrant cap needs to be removed by noon tomorrow. I'm sending a crew at 1 o'clock to verify it's been done. If that cap is still in place, I'll have it removed by force and bill the HOA for the service call. That will cost you about $2,000 plus the daily fine. He turned to address the room. I strongly suggest you all review your board's spending and maintenance records. Based on what I've seen, there's been significant negligence here. These violations didn't happen overnight. This is the result of years of inadequate maintenance and poor decision-making. With that, Chief Drummond nodded to me and walked out of the clubhouse. The room stayed silent for a long moment after he left. Then everyone started talking at once. Bill Patterson stood up. Patricia, did you know about any of these violations? The maintenance reports never indicated. When was the last time anyone inspected the clubhouse fire extinguishers? Margaret Chen demanded. Patricia looked at Deanne, who looked at Marcus, who shrugged helplessly. This is unacceptable, James Rodriguez said. We pay HOA dues to maintain this place properly. Where has that money been going? Kenneth Marsh tried to take control. Everyone, please calm down. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. $200,000 in fines. Someone shouted from the back. That's going to bankrupt the HOA. We need to see the budget, Bill Patterson said. Right now, we need a full accounting of how the HOA money has been spent. Patricia looked cornered. The budget is available for review by appointment, no. Margaret Chen stood up. We're not waiting for an appointment. The treasurer is right there. Marcus, get the budget records. Now. Marcus Webb looked at Patricia, who gave a tiny shake of her head, but the room was turning hostile, and he seemed to realize that refusing would make things worse. He pulled out his laptop and connected it to the projector that had been set up for the meeting. What came up on the screen made everything make sense in the worst possible way. The HOA had spent $47,000 on landscaping in the past year, but most of that money had gone to a company called Desert Elite Landscaping. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Desert Elite Landscaping was owned by Richard Mooreland, Patricia's husband. The room exploded. You've been funneling HOA money to your husband's company. Bill Patterson's voice was shaking with anger. That's not it was a legitimate contract, Patricia stammered. At twice the market rate, Marcus Webb said quietly. He was scrolling through the records, his face growing more troubled. I never looked at this closely before. Patricia always said she had compared bids, but there's no record of any other landscaping companies being considered. What about the clubhouse renovation last year? James Rodriguez asked. Who did that work? Marcus clicked through more files. Desert Elite again. Actually, they've been the contractor for almost every major project for the past 3 years. Pool resurfacing, parking lot seal coating, roof repairs on the Ramada. How much total? Margaret Chen asked. Marcus did some quick calculations. Over the past 3 years, approximately $190,000. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Our HOA had about 250 families. We each paid about $800 a year in dues. That meant Patricia had funneled almost the entire HOA budget for 3 years to her husband's company. This is fraud, Bill Patterson said flatly. This is embezzlement. Patricia stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to these accusations. The board has conducted all business in accordance with sit down, Patricia. The command came from Kenneth Marsh. He was staring at the laptop screen, his face ashen. I'm the vice president. I should have been reviewing these expenditures. I sign off on payments over $5,000. These invoices. He clicked through several files. These invoices were approved with my electronic signature, but I never saw them. Are you saying someone forged your signature? James Rodriguez asked. Kenneth looked at Patricia. I'm saying the only other person with access to my signing credentials is the HOA president. Patricia grabbed her purse. I'm not staying here to be insulted. This meeting is adjourned. You don't get to adjourn this meeting, Margaret Chen said. I move to remove Patricia Mooreland from the board effective immediately. I second that motion, Bill Patterson said instantly. All in favor. Margaret looked around the room. Nearly every hand went up. Patricia's face went from red to purple. You can't vote me out. The bylaws require. The bylaws allow for removal of board members for cause with a 2/3 vote of homeowners present at a meeting, James Rodriguez said. He had pulled up the documents on his phone. We clearly have more than 2/3. Patricia looked at the other board members for support, but they were all carefully avoiding eye contact. Kenneth Marsh was still staring at the budget records with a look of growing horror. Fine, Patricia spat. But you're all making a huge mistake. Without me, this community will fall apart. She stormed toward the door, then turned back. And Gregory, I'm coming after you personally for defamation. My lawyer will be in touch. She slammed the door on her way out. The clubhouse was silent for a moment. Then Bill Patterson said, We need to call the police. That's how the criminal investigation started. Bill called the Phoenix Police Department from the clubhouse, and 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They took statements from Kenneth, Marcus, and several homeowners, and they took possession of Marcus's laptop as evidence. One of the officers told us that financial crimes involving HOAs were surprisingly common, but they took them seriously because they affected entire communities. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. It turned out that Patricia's scheme was even more extensive than we had initially realized. The police brought in forensic accountants who discovered that she had been siphoning money for 5 years. Not 3. The total amount was close to $350,000. But that wasn't all. Desert Elite Landscaping, Richard Mooreland's company, had been submitting invoices for work that was never performed. The $47,000 supposedly spent on landscaping that year. Most of it was for services like tree trimming and irrigation system upgrades that had never actually happened. The company would submit an invoice. Patricia would approve it using Kenneth's forged signature, and the HOA would cut a check. Richard would deposit the check, take a cut, and kick the rest back to Patricia through various methods that the forensic accountants were still unraveling. The fire code violations suddenly made sense. Patricia had been starving the HOA of maintenance funds to maximize the money she could steal. Fire extinguishers weren't replaced because that cost money. Smoke detectors weren't maintained because that required paying attention to something other than how much she could embezzle. The entire subdivision had been allowed to become a fire hazard so Patricia could fund her lifestyle. I learned from Bill Patterson, who had taken over as interim president, that Patricia and Richard drove matching Lexus SUVs, had recently renovated their house with a pool and outdoor kitchen, and had taken 3 European vacations in the past 2 years. All of that was funded by money stolen from the Homeowners Association. The cap on my hydrant was removed the morning after the meeting. I went out to check at about 8 o'clock and found that someone had cut through the bolts and removed the entire assembly. The hydrant was functional again. I called Chief Drummond to let him know, and he sent someone out to verify and document it. Over the next month, the HOA worked frantically to address the fire code violations. Bill Patterson organized volunteer work parties. We had homeowners who were electricians, contractors, and landscapers, and they donated their time to fix many of the issues. For the more complex problems, the HOA hired legitimate contractors, getting competitive bids and documenting everything meticulously. The fire extinguishers were replaced. The exit signs were repaired. The emergency exits were cleared. A proper fire suppression system was installed in the clubhouse kitchen, which cost $12,000 but was absolutely necessary. Vegetation was cleared from around structures. The pool equipment shed was rewired. Smoke detectors were installed and tested. The retention pond fence was repaired. Fire lanes were repainted, and the HOA instituted a strict towing policy. It was expensive, but the homeowners rallied. We voted to do a special assessment, spreading the cost over 2 years so it wouldn't be too burdensome for any single family. Everyone understood that these were necessary safety improvements that should have been done years ago. Chief Drummond came back for his re-inspection in mid-August. He spent an entire day going through the common areas, checking every item on his original violation list. At the end of the day, he met with the newly reorganized board in the clubhouse. "I'm impressed," he said. "You folks have done excellent work in a very short time. I'm certifying that all violations have been corrected." He handed Bill Patterson a signed document. "This means the fines are waived. You won't owe the $200,000. The relief in the room was palpable. Bill actually teared up a little. "Thank you, Chief. And thank you for pushing us to address these issues. I'm ashamed it took a crisis to make us pay attention." "Don't be too hard on yourself," Chief Drummond said. "Most people trust their HOA board to do the right thing. It's not your fault that trust was betrayed. But going forward, I'd recommend implementing better oversight. Review the budget quarterly. Get multiple bids for any work over a certain amount. Don't give any single person too much control." We all nodded. The new board had already started implementing those exact policies. The criminal case against Patricia and Richard Mooreland moved slowly, as these things do. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office charged Patricia with fraudulent schemes and artifices, forgery, and theft. Richard was charged as an accomplice. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence, but Patricia hired an expensive defense attorney who tried every delay tactic in the book. Meanwhile, The HOA filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. That case also dragged on, but our attorney was confident. The evidence was clear, and there was insurance that might cover some of the losses. In October, I was working from home when I got a call from Detective Sarah Morrison, the financial crimes investigator who had taken over the case. She had been keeping me updated since I was the one who had inadvertently exposed the whole scheme. "Mr. Iverson, I wanted to let you know that Patricia Mooreland pleaded guilty this morning." I felt a wave of relief. "Really? I thought she was going to fight this." Her attorney finally convinced her that the evidence was insurmountable. She pleaded guilty to fraudulent schemes, theft, and 3 counts of forgery. Richard pleaded guilty to conspiracy and theft. They're both looking at prison time. How much? Patricia will probably get 3 to 5 years. Richard might get 2 to 3. The judge will decide at sentencing, but those are the prosecutor's recommendations. They've also agreed to make full restitution, though realistically, they'll never be able to pay back the full amount. What about the civil case? That will probably settle now. Once there's a criminal conviction, the civil case becomes a lot easier. Your HOA should recover most of what was stolen, especially with the insurance claim. After I hung up with Detective Morrison, I sat in my home office for a while, processing everything. It had been 5 months since that Tuesday morning when I found the cap on my hydrant. 5 months of meetings, investigations, repairs, and stress. But we had come through it. Sentencing happened in December. I attended the hearing along with Bill Patterson, Margaret Chen, and several other homeowners. Patricia and Richard both stood before Judge Amanda Soto in Maricopa County Superior Court. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, detailing the scheme, the amount stolen, and the impact on the community. She talked about how the fire code violations had endangered lives, and how Patricia's retaliation against me for voting against her dues increase had ultimately exposed the whole fraud. Patricia's attorney tried to paint her as someone who had made mistakes, but wasn't truly criminal. He talked about her service to the community, her volunteer work, and how she had lost her way. It was a decent effort, but it fell flat. The evidence was too damning, and Patricia's complete lack of remorse during the investigation had clearly annoyed the judge. When Judge Soto spoke, her voice was cold. "Mrs. Mooreland, you held a position of trust in your community. Homeowners elected you to manage their collective resources and maintain their common areas. Instead, you treated the HOA as your personal bank account. You stole money that should have gone to safety maintenance. You allowed fire hazards to proliferate throughout the subdivision because you were too busy stealing to do your job. And when a homeowner threatened to expose you, even inadvertently, you retaliated by disabling emergency safety equipment." Patricia stood with her head bowed, her attorney's hand on her shoulder. "I'm sentencing you to 5 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections," Judge Soto continued. "You will also pay full restitution to the Sunset Ridge Estates, HOA, in the amount of $347,000. Mr. Mooreland, you enabled and profited from your wife's crimes. I'm sentencing you to 3 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections and joint liability for the restitution." Patricia's face crumpled, and she started crying. Richard just looked numb. The bailiffs led them both out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, Bill Patterson shook my hand. "We never would have uncovered any of this if you hadn't called the fire department about that hydrant." "I just didn't want my insurance to go up," I said, only half joking. Margaret Chen laughed. "Well, you ended up doing the whole community a service. The new board is actually functional. We're running budget surpluses. The common areas look better than they have in years, and people are actually paying attention now. That was true. HOA meeting attendance had gone from about 20 people to over 100. Homeowners were engaged, asking questions, reviewing expenditures. The board had implemented transparency measures, including posting all financial documents online and holding quarterly town halls. The insurance claim paid out about $200,000, and the restitution payments would theoretically cover the rest. Though realistically, Patricia and Richard would be making small monthly payments for the rest of their lives. The HOA had recovered financially and was actually in better shape than before Patricia's scheme. As for me, my life returned to normal. The hydrant stood proudly in my front yard, freshly painted red by a volunteer work party that had repainted all the common area structures. My homeowner's insurance premium stayed low, and I had a great story about the time my HOA president tried to retaliate against me and ended up in prison. In March, almost a year after the whole ordeal began, I was doing some work in my garage when a car pulled into my driveway. It was Chief Drummond, now in civilian clothes, driving a personal truck. "Chief, what brings you by?" I walked out to meet him. "I'm actually retiring next month," he said. "Moving to Prescott to be near my grandkids, but I wanted to stop by and tell you something before I left." "What's that?" In 30 years with the fire department, I've seen a lot of stupid and dangerous things. But what your HOA president did was one of the worst cases of reckless endangerment I've encountered. If there had been a wildfire in those 5 months before I inspected the property, people could have died. The lack of proper fire extinguishers, the blocked exits, the vegetation violations, any one of those could have been catastrophic. He looked at my hydrant. "You calling me about that cap probably saved lives. You definitely saved your community from financial ruin. I wanted to make sure you knew that." I felt a lump in my throat. "I appreciate that, Chief. I just did what made sense." "That's exactly the point. You did what made sense, and you didn't back down when someone tried to intimidate you. That takes courage." He shook my hand. "Enjoy your retirement in a safe, well-maintained community." After he left, I stood in my driveway for a while, looking at the hydrant. It was just a piece of equipment, really. A red post connected to a water line. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The importance of standing up to petty tyranny, the value of safety over aesthetics, and the need for accountability in positions of trust. The following month, the HOA held elections for the full board. Bill Patterson ran for president and won easily. Margaret Chen became vice president. James Rodriguez took over as treasurer with a mandate to implement strict financial controls. The new board was diverse, engaged, and committed to transparency. At their first official meeting, they passed a resolution officially thanking me for exposing the fraud. They also passed new rules requiring competitive bids for all contracts over $5,000, mandatory board training on fiduciary duty, and quarterly financial audits by an independent accountant. But the most important change was cultural. Homeowners were no longer passive. They attended meetings, asked questions, and held the board accountable. The days of one person ruling the HOA like a personal kingdom were over. In May, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. Patricia Mooreland had written to me from prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short and handwritten. Patricia's normally immaculate penmanship was shaky, and there were water stains on the paper that might have been tears. "Mr. Iverson, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and you have every right to hate me. I'm writing this because my therapist says I need to take accountability. You were right about everything. I did cap your hydrant because I was angry about the vote. I did steal money from the HOA. I did put people's lives at risk. I was so focused on maintaining control and funding my lifestyle that I lost sight of basic decency and responsibility. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong. I hope the community is doing better without me. Patricia. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. The apology felt genuine, but it didn't undo the damage. Patricia would serve her time and hopefully she would come out a better person. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Summer came to Phoenix with its usual intensity. Temperatures soared above 115 degrees. The wildfire risk was extreme, with red flag warnings almost every day. But Sunset Ridge Estates was prepared. The vegetation management was up to date. The fire extinguishers were current. The hydrants, including mine, were functional and accessible. The fire department included our subdivision in their emergency response plans with confidence. In late June, there was a brush fire about 3 miles from our subdivision. It started from a lightning strike and spread quickly through the dry desert scrub. The Phoenix Fire Department responded with multiple units, and they used the water from my hydrant as part of their defensive line. I stood in my driveway and watched the firefighters work, connecting their hoses to the hydrant that Patricia had wanted to cap because it was ugly. The fire was contained before it reached any homes. No one was injured, and my hydrant played a small but real role in protecting the community. That night, I got a text from Bill Patterson. "Your hydrant earned its keep today. Thank God it was functional," I replied. "Thank God Patricia isn't on the board anymore." He sent back a laughing emoji and a thumbs up. As I sit here now, writing this story from my home office, I can see the hydrant through my window. It's still there, red and functional, a small monument to the importance of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. The HOA never bothered me about it again, and in fact, they've started encouraging other homeowners with large lots to consider installing private hydrants. Fire safety is now a priority instead of an afterthought. The subdivision is thriving. Property values have actually increased because of the well-publicized improvements to safety and financial management. New families are moving in, attracted by the active and transparent HOA. The clubhouse hosts regular community events, all conducted in a building that now meets or exceeds fire code requirements. Patricia and Richard are still in prison. They'll be eligible for early release in a few years if they maintain good behavior, but they'll be dealing with the financial and legal consequences of their crimes for the rest of their lives. Their house was sold to help pay restitution, and they both filed for bankruptcy. It's a harsh outcome, but it was the natural consequence of their choices. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned that homeowner associations can be forces for good or vehicles for petty tyranny, depending on who's in charge. I learned that transparency and accountability are essential in any organization, no matter how small. I learned that safety regulations exist for good reasons and shouldn't be dismissed as bureaucratic nonsense. And I learned that sometimes standing up for what's right can have consequences far beyond what you initially imagined. That Tuesday morning when I found the cap on my hydrant, I was just annoyed. I wanted to protect my insurance rate and maintain my property rights. I had no idea that my phone call to the fire department would expose a massive fraud, send 2 people to prison, and transform my entire community. But that's how it worked out, and I'm proud of the role I played. The hydrant is still there, standing sentinel in my front yard. It's red, it's functional, and it's ready to help protect lives if needed. And nobody from the HOA is going to cap it ever again. That's the way it should be, and that's the way it's going to stay. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder what would have occurred if I had just accepted the HOA's notice and removed the hydrant. Would the fraud have continued? Would the fire code violations have persisted until someone actually got hurt? I'll never know for certain, but I suspect the answer is yes. Patricia would have kept stealing, the subdivision would have kept deteriorating, and eventually there would have been a tragedy. Instead, a simple act of standing up for common sense triggered a chain of events that made the community safer, more transparent, and more just. It wasn't always pleasant. There were stressful meetings, uncomfortable confrontations, and months of uncertainty. But it was worth it. The story spread beyond our subdivision. Local news outlets picked it up, and it became something of a cautionary tale about HOA abuse. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. Homeowners need to pay attention to their HOAs. Boards need oversight, and safety should never be compromised for aesthetics or personal gain. Some other HOAs in the Phoenix area used our story as a wake-up call. They implemented new financial controls, started conducting regular safety inspections, and increased transparency. One HOA president from a neighboring subdivision even called me to ask for advice on preventing fraud. I gave him Chief Drummond's contact information and suggested he invite the fire department to do a voluntary inspection before any problems arose. The ripple effects were real and positive. A bad situation had been transformed into a learning opportunity for the wider community. That's probably the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. In the end, it all came down to a simple principle: doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it makes powerful people angry, even when you don't know what the consequences will be. I saw something that was wrong: the capping of emergency safety equipment, and I reported it to the appropriate authorities. That's all I did. Everything else flowed from that one decision. If there's a moral to this story, it's this: don't let petty tyrants intimidate you. Question authority when authority is wrong. Pay attention to how your community organizations are run, and never, ever compromise on safety to appease someone's ego. The consequences of standing up might be uncomfortable in the short term, but the consequences of staying silent can be catastrophic. My hydrant is still red, still functional, and still standing. And every time I see it, I'm reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of principle can have the biggest impacts. Patricia Mooreland thought she could bully me into compliance by capping that hydrant. Instead, she exposed her own crimes and lost everything. Justice doesn't always work that cleanly, but when it does, it's deeply satisfying. The community of Sunset Ridge Estates is better off now than it was before this all started. The HOA is well managed, transparent, and focused on actually serving the homeowners rather than enriching a corrupt board member. The common areas are safe and well maintained. People are engaged and active, and everyone learned a valuable lesson about the importance of oversight and accountability. I still live in the same house, still drive past that hydrant every day, and still remember the morning this all began. It was a strange journey, from finding an orange cap on a fire hydrant to watching an HOA president get sentenced to prison, but every step of it made sense at the time. I did what needed to be done, the authorities did their jobs, and the system worked the way it was supposed to. That doesn't always happen, so I'm grateful it did this time. The fire hydrant in my yard isn't just a piece of safety equipment anymore. It's a reminder that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to accept wrongdoing, that institutions can be reformed when corruption is exposed, and that justice, while sometimes slow, can ultimately prevail. Every time I look at that red post standing in my front yard, I feel a sense of satisfaction knowing that I did the right thing, and that my community is safer and better because of it. That's the story of how my HOA president capped my private fire hydrant and ended up in prison. It's not the story I expected to tell when I moved to Sunset Ridge Estates, but it's the story that happened. And in the end, I'm glad it did, because it made my community a better place to live. Sometimes life gives you unexpected challenges, and sometimes those challenges turn into opportunities to make real positive change. This was one of those times, and I wouldn't change how it turned out for anything.